My mother looked at me across the dinner table and said, very calmly as if she were commenting on the weather, that they would no longer be covering my tuition. Not this semester. Not next semester. Not ever, unless I apologized to my sister. I put down my fork. I looked at her, then at my father, then back at her. And I said one word. Okay. My mother blinked. My father frowned. My sister, who was sitting right there swirling her wine like she hadn't just watched our parents detonate a bomb over the pasta, looked up at me with something I can only describe as wariness. Not guilt. Wariness. Like she was watching an animal she thought she had cornered suddenly go very, very still. I got up from the table. I thanked them for dinner. I walked upstairs, closed my bedroom door quietly, and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for about 4 minutes. Then I started packing. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without context, and the context is something I spent a long time being ashamed of before I realized there was nothing about it that was mine to be ashamed of. I grew up in a house in Oakville, Ontario. Nice neighborhood, detached garage, the kind of street where everyone's lawn is cut on the same day. My parents worked hard for everything they had. My father spent 30 years at the same insurance firm, working his way from junior adjuster to regional manager. My mother ran a small bookkeeping business from the spare room until I was about 12, then went back to work full-time at a property management company when my sister started high school. We were not rich, we were comfortable. There is a difference, and in our house, that difference was explained to us regularly. My sister's name is Jolene. She is 4 years older than me, and from the time I was old enough to understand that the world treated people differently, I understood that Jolene was the one it liked. She was pretty in a way that people commented on. She was confident in a way that rooms responded to. She got grades that were just good enough to avoid concern and just charming enough to avoid criticism. She married a man named Barrett when she was 26. Barrett, who came from old money in London, Ontario, whose family had a cottage on Lake Huron and opinions about wine, and my parents acted like she had been recruited by the Olympics. I was the other one. Not ugly, not failing, not causing trouble. Just not Jolene. My parents loved me in the way that people love a sensible piece of furniture, reliably, without much notice, until they needed to move it out of the way. I was the one who got a part-time job at 16 to cover my own school supplies. I was the one who applied for every bursary and scholarship I could find when it came time for university. I was the one who sat at that kitchen table with my OSAP forms and my spreadsheets while Jolene was taken out for a celebratory dinner because Barrett's family had offered to pay for her interior design certification, a certification she would complete exactly 1 semester of before deciding it wasn't for her. My parents paid for Jolene's first year of university. They paid for her second. They co-signed Barrett's first mortgage when his family's money turned out to be more complicated than anyone had let on. They lent her money for a car she crashed within 8 months. They gave her a cash gift for her wedding that I only found out the amount of by accident when I saw the transfer in my father's online banking because he'd left his laptop open. I want to be clear that I never asked for equal treatment. I want to be clear that I understood from a young age that asking would be pointless. I want to be clear that I had built my entire adult life around the assumption that I was on my own, that I had found a way to be okay with that. What I had not built my life around was the possibility that they would take the small thing they were contributing and weaponize it. I was in my second year of a Bachelor of Commerce at McMaster. I had a partial scholarship. I had a co-op placement lined up for the winter semester at a financial consulting firm in Hamilton. I had a 3.7 GPA and a student loan I was managing carefully and a plan that was tight but functional. My parents covered $2,000 a semester toward my tuition. That was it. That was their contribution. $2,000. And they pulled it because I wouldn't apologize to Jolene for something I did not do. What Jolene said I did, told her mother-in-law that her marriage was in trouble. What actually happened? Barrett's mother called me, not Jolene me, and asked me directly if I thought Jolene seemed happy. Because she had noticed things, tension at family dinners, a coldness between them. She was concerned. She asked me what I thought. I told her I couldn't speak to what went on inside their marriage, but that Jolene had seemed stressed lately, and that maybe the best thing would be to talk to Jolene directly. That's it. That's the whole conversation. Jolene found out. I still don't know how, and told my parents that I had poisoned her relationship with Barrett's family. That I was jealous, that I had always been jealous, that I had been trying to undermine her for years. My father, who had never once in my memory questioned a single thing Jolene told him, accepted this immediately and completely. My mother, who was slightly more skeptical for approximately 48 hours, eventually arrived at the same conclusion. They called me into the house for what I thought was a family dinner. It was not a family dinner, it was a tribunal. They explained that I owed Jolene an apology. Not a conversation, not an explanation of what actually happened. An apology. A full, unqualified acknowledgement that I had been wrong, that I was sorry, and that I would not interfere in Jolene's life again. I asked my father what, specifically, he believed I had done wrong. He said it didn't matter. What mattered was that Jolene was hurt. I looked at my mother and I asked her the same question. She said, "You know what you did." I sat with that for a moment. The pasta was getting cold. Someone had lit a candle in the middle of the table, which felt almost satirical. And then my mother told me about the tuition. She framed it as temporary. She framed it as a consequence, not a punishment. She actually used those words like she'd rehearsed them. She said they would reconsider once I'd shown that I was willing to repair the damage I'd caused to our family. I said okay. I got up. I thanked them for dinner. I went upstairs and I sat in the dark for 4 minutes and then I started packing. I called my best friend, her name is Waverly, and I have known her since the 7th grade, from the parking lot of a Tim Hortons at 11:30 at night. I had 2 suitcases and a duffel bag in the back of my car and approximately $400 in my checking account and the calm, crystalline certainty that I was never going back to that house. Waverly did not ask a single question, she just said, "Do you need the couch or the air mattress?" I said the couch. She said, "There's leftover butter chicken in the fridge, keys under the mat." I drove to her apartment in Burlington and ate cold butter chicken at her kitchen counter at midnight and cried exactly once, a short, sharp, ugly cry, the kind that surprises you. And then I stopped. Because I had things to figure out and crying was not going to figure them out for me. The next morning I made a list. I had already been accepted for the co-op placement. That meant a paid position starting in January. Not enough to cover everything, but a start. McMaster's financial aid office had an emergency bursary process. I'd seen it mentioned in the student handbook and never thought I'd need it. My scholarship wasn't going anywhere. The actual financial gap between what I had and what I needed, was real, but it was not insurmountable. I had been running tight budgets since I was 16. I knew how to do this. What I also had, sitting quietly in the back of my mind while I ate toast at Waverly's table, was a question. My parents had, over the course of my childhood and young adulthood, positioned themselves as financially stable, careful people. My father talked about money the way people talk about a religion they have been practicing for decades. With certainty, with ritual, with a slightly pained expression when others did it wrong. He reviewed their investments quarterly. He had a financial planner. He was, by all external appearances, someone who had his affairs completely in order, but I was an accounting student, and I had over the years picked up things, small things, inconsistencies in things my father mentioned in passing, a conversation I'd half overheard about Barrett and a line of credit. The way my father had looked for just a second when Barrett's family's money situation had first come to light, not surprised, exactly, more like braced. I had never pulled on that thread because it wasn't my business and because, honestly, I had not wanted to know. But somewhere around 2 in the morning, sitting in the blue light of my laptop while Waverly slept, I started doing what accounting students do when something doesn't add up. I started looking. I wasn't hacking anything. I wasn't doing anything illegal. I was using publicly available records, corporate filings through the Ontario Business Registry, property records, court filings, the kind of thing anyone can access if they know how to look and have the patience to look carefully. What I found over the next 3 weeks unfolded the way these things do, slowly at first, then all at once. Barrett's family business, a mid-sized property development company that operated primarily in southwestern Ontario, had been in quiet financial difficulty for several years. There had been a civil suit, settled out of court, involving a subcontractor. There were 3 numbered companies registered to Barrett's father that appeared to have been created and dissolved in a pattern that, to someone studying forensic accounting, looked very deliberate. There was a property in Muskoka, a second property, not the Lake Huron cottage, that had been transferred to a holding company rather than sold, at a point when the development firm was showing losses. None of this, on its own, was my business or my problem. Except that one of those numbered companies had, according to the filings, a silent partner. A co-investor who had contributed capital and received an equity stake. The co-investor was my father. I sat with that for a long time. My father, the man who reviewed his investments quarterly, who had a financial planner, who talked about money like it was a religion, had been a silent partner in Barrett's family's business for at least 6 years. He had contributed, as far as I could calculate from the documents available, somewhere in the range of $60,000. $60,000 during years when, apparently, there was only $2,000 per semester available for my education. I kept going. Because once you find one thing, you start to wonder what else is there. The mortgage cosign for Jolene and Barrett, I already knew about that, but I hadn't known that a second loan had been guaranteed 18 months later against my parents' own home, a home equity line of credit, drawn down significantly. The reason given in the mortgage documentation was home improvement. I knew my parents' house, I had lived in it for 18 years, there had been no renovations, I built a document. I had learned in my forensic accounting elective how to create an evidence map, a visual record connecting entities and transactions so you could see the pattern instead of just the individual pieces. I sat in Waverly's spare room with a second-hand printer she'd brought from her parents' place, and I printed things and I organized things and I cross-referenced things, and after about 2 weeks I had a document that told a very clear, very uncomfortable story. My parents had been funneling money into Barrett's family's financial situation for years. Some of it may have been legitimate investment. Some of it looked significantly less clean. The home equity draw was either genuinely for renovations, which I could disprove because I had photographs from a family Christmas 2 years ago that showed the house completely unchanged, or it was being used for something else. I didn't know yet what that something else was, but I knew someone who might. My father's financial planner worked at a firm in Mississauga. I knew this because my father had mentioned the firm's name once during a conversation about RRSPs, and I had remembered it the way I remember all financial details, automatically, without trying. I did not contact the financial planner. What I did was contact the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario. Not to make a formal complaint, not yet. To ask questions, to understand the process, to know what I was looking at before I decided what to do with what I was looking at. The woman I spoke to was patient and specific. She explained what would constitute a reportable irregularity. She explained what documentation would be relevant. She explained that if I had evidence suggesting that funds from a registered mortgage product had been misrepresented in their stated purpose, that was something they would be interested in. I thanked her and hung up and sat in Waverly's car. We were in a parking garage in downtown Hamilton because I hadn't wanted to make the call somewhere I could be overheard, and I looked out through the windshield at the concrete wall in front of me for a while. I thought about my father at that dinner table. I thought about my mother saying, "You know what you did." I thought about Jolene swirling her wine. I thought about $2,000 a semester, and I thought about $60,000 going into Barrett's family's business over 6 years. I drove back to Waverly's apartment, and I kept working. 3 weeks after I left, my mother called me. I let it go to voicemail. She said she hoped I was safe and that there was still time to fix things if I was willing to come to the table with an open heart. She did not ask where I was. She did not ask if I had enough money. She did not ask anything about my tuition or my co-op or how I was managing. She asked if I was willing to apologize. I did not call back. A week after that, Jolene texted me. It was a long message, the kind of message people send when they want to feel like they've made an effort without actually having to make an effort. She said she missed me. She said she understood this was hard. She said the family wasn't the same without me at the table. She did not say she was sorry. She did not say she had asked our parents to reinstate my tuition. She did not say she had corrected the story she had told them. I read the message twice and then I went back to my document. By that point, the document was 43 pages. I graduated from the co-op placement in the spring with a job offer. Entry level at the same firm starting September. The salary was not glamorous, but it was real and it was mine, and it covered my rent on a small apartment I'd found in Hamilton with a woman named Dottie who worked nights at the hospital and was the best roommate I have ever had. I did not tell my parents about the job. I did not tell them about the apartment. I was finishing the document. I did not go to the police. I want to be clear about that. What I did was contact a forensic accountant. A real one, credentialed, practicing. I found her through McMaster's alumni network, and I paid for a 90-minute consultation with money I had been setting aside for 3 months for exactly this purpose. Her name was Dr. Asanti, and she was the sharpest person I have ever sat across a table from. She took my 43 pages and she read them, not skimmed, read over the course of an hour while I sat quietly and waited. Then she looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "You put this together yourself?" I said yes. She said, "You're how old?" I said 22. She looked back at the document. Then she said, "There are 3 things here that would interest a regulator, and 1 thing here that would interest a crown attorney." I asked her which one. She pointed to a page near the end, the home equity draw. The documentation I had found, a record, filed as part of an unrelated insurance claim dispute that had become part of the public record, showing that the funds had been transferred not to a contractor, not to a supplier, but to one of Barrett's father's numbered companies, the one that had since been dissolved. That, she said, is mortgage fraud. I did not file anything that day. I went home. I sat with it for 2 weeks. I talked to Waverly, who told me she would support me whatever I decided, and then asked me very directly what I wanted the outcome to be. I had to think about that for a long time. I did not want my parents to go to prison. I want to be honest about that. They were my parents, and whatever they had done and whatever they had chosen, I did not want to sit in a courtroom and watch them be prosecuted. What I wanted was for them to understand what they had done. Not just to me, to themselves. To their own lives. I wanted them to see clearly, possibly for the first time, what the last 6 years had actually looked like from the outside. I also wanted them to be afraid. Not indefinitely, not permanently, just enough. I sent the document to my father on a Tuesday morning. Not by email, by registered mail to the house in Oakville, in an envelope with my return address on it because I was not hiding. Inside the envelope was the 43-page document, a 1-page cover letter I had written and rewritten 17 times, and a single sentence at the bottom of the cover letter that said, "I have also retained a copy with my lawyer, and I will decide by the end of the month how to proceed." I did not have a lawyer. I had Dr. Asante's business card and a very strong awareness of what I was holding, but they didn't know that. My father called me 4 hours later. I let it ring. He called again and again. Then my mother called, then Jolene called, then a number I didn't recognize called, which I later determined was Barrett. I did not answer any of them. I was at work. I had a presentation to prepare for a client meeting the following morning, and I prepared it, and I went to the meeting, and I did well in the meeting, and I ate a sandwich at my desk and finished my coffee and took the bus home. When I got back to the apartment, I had 11 voicemails. I made dinner first. Dottie was working, so it was just me, and I made pasta, not because I was trying to be symbolic about it, just because it was fast. And I ate it standing at the kitchen counter, and then I sat down and listened to the voicemails. My father's voice on the first one was controlled. By the third one it was not. By the 6th one, which was my mother's, there was a quality to it that I had never heard before in 30 years of knowing her. Not anger, fear. The 11th voicemail was my father again. His voice was quiet. He said he thought we should talk. He said he understood that things had gone too far. He said, and this is the part I have replayed many times since, "I think I made some mistakes." Not, "I think we made some mistakes." I called him back the next evening. I told him I would meet with him and my mother once in a public place, not at the house in Oakville. I told him Jolene was not invited. I told him I had 3 things I needed to hear before I would consider any path forward, and that if those 3 things were not said clearly and genuinely, I would be filing the document with the FSRA by the end of the month. He agreed. We met at a coffee shop in Mississauga. My mother looked like she had not slept in several days. My father looked older than I remembered him. We sat in a corner booth and no one ordered anything, and the ambient noise of the espresso machine felt very loud. I said my 3 things. I needed to hear that they understood what they had taken from me. Not just the money, but the years of assuming I was alone in my own family, the years of making myself smaller so Jolene could be bigger, the years of funding my own education while they funded a business I didn't know existed. I needed to hear that they understood this was not about Jolene being hurt. This was about a pattern that had been operating for as long as I could remember, and that the tuition had just been the moment I had finally decided to stop pretending I didn't see it. And I needed to hear that they were going to get their own legal and financial advice, independently, not through Barrett's family's connections, about the situation the document described, because I was not going to be the person holding this indefinitely, and the kindest thing I could do for them was make sure they understood the exposure they were sitting in. My father looked at his hands, then he looked at me, and he said all 3 things, not perfectly, not with the eloquence of someone who had rehearsed it. He stumbled over the second one and had to stop and start again, and my mother was crying quietly into a napkin the whole time, and there was nothing cinematic about any of it. But he said them. My parents retained a lawyer within the week. Not because I made them, because they understood finally what the document meant and what their exposure was. There were conversations with Barrett's family that I was not part of and did not need to be part of. There was a process that took several months and involved disclosures and adjustments, and the kind of reckoning that comes when people who have been pretending everything is fine are forced to stop pretending. Barrett and Jolene's marriage did not survive it, not because of me. I want to be clear about that. Because of the things that had been true about their finances and their relationship long before I sent any envelope. The pressure of everything finally being visible was too much for what they had built on top of it. Jolene called me once, about 8 months after the coffee shop meeting. She was living in a rented condo in Etobicoke. She sounded like a different person, quieter, less certain, like someone who had been walking on a surface they thought was solid and had discovered it was not. She didn't apologize, not really. She said she understood that things hadn't been fair. She said she thought she had known on some level and had let herself not know. I told her I appreciated her saying that. I meant it. Partially. We are not close, we are not estranged. We exist now, in some careful middle space that feels honest in a way that our family never quite was. I am 24 now. I have a one-bedroom apartment in Hamilton that I share with no one. I have a job I am good at and getting better at. I have student loans I am paying down on a schedule I made myself, and I have a savings account that grows a little every month. And I have Waverly, who came over last month, and we ordered sushi and watched 3 hours of television, and it was the best evening I'd had in months. My parents and I talk. Not often. Not easily. But we talk. My father asks about work, my mother asks about the apartment, nobody mentions the document, nobody mentions the coffee shop. We are all, I think, aware of exactly how much rearranging has happened since that dinner table, that pasta, that one word. There is something they understand now that they did not understand before. I am not sure I could name it exactly. It is not respect, exactly, or fear, exactly, or love, exactly. It is something more like recognition, like they are see clearly, for the first time. I spent a long time being the one they overlooked, the one who handled it, the one who figured it out, the one who needed nothing. It turns out that the one who needed nothing was the most dangerous person in that house. They just didn't know it until I was already gone.